Hi, everyone. This is Ashley Latecki Ellenboss with Skyhouse Herb School and Apothecary. And today we'll be talking about the magic, the medicine, and the powers of yarrow. And yarrow is a very special and sacred plant to me. It's one that I've used for years. It was probably one of my first favorite herbs when I started studying herbal medicine. So I'm really excited to share some of its properties, its history, and some of its sort of less traditional uses with you. So yarrow is in the composite family or the daisy family, also called the Asteraceae family. And this family is kind of it's the largest flowering plant family here in North America. So its cousins would be herbs and plants like sunflowers and dandelions and chicory. And, there's all the artemisias are related to yarrow and to this plant family. So the Latin name is Achillea millefolium, and Achillea is named from the Greek hero Achilles. And in the story of Achilles, he used yarrow on the battlefields to heal the wounds of his friends who were battling with him. And so he was called, the hero, and he was considered to be a hero of invulnerability because he could heal anything. He could heal any wound. And so he's considered to be invulnerable. And I think that's a really interesting thing to think about with yarrow because it's also been used as a flower and a plant of protection. So, we can think about vulnerability. Of course, we all want to be vulnerable here in the new age, right? Like, yes, we want to not be so hard and stoic that nothing penetrates us. But I think in the spirit of what we're talking about here is that we're not vulnerable to injuries, to pain, and to negativity. And that's one of the teachings of yarrow is it helps us to protect ourselves from those wounds. Lots of different types of wounds that can affect us physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Um, Also, the second part of the name is interesting, which is millefolium. And millefolium it's made of two words, milli, which means thousand, and folium, which means leaves. And I have a yarrow plant here that my daughter picked for me a few days ago, and it might be a little hard to see. Let me just pull one of the leaves off. Um, this one's a little bit uh, kind of wilted now, but you can see how, it almost looks like it has 100 or 1,000 little leaves with this one leaf. But it's actually, this is one leaf with a lot of little leaflets. It's like a divided leaf is what we call it. So that's kind of an interesting thing. Another interesting thing about the name yarrow is that it's believed to come from the word hieros, Hieros, which is a Greek word, which means sacred. And one of the reasons we think that this is the reason why they called it yarrow or hero is because of its use in ceremonial rituals, as a talisman, and also as a conduit for bringing in superconscious energy, which is kind of interesting. So it has, in so many different cultures around the world, we see yarrow as not only a medicine, but also as a symbol of something. So we can look at it from the more kind of druid perspective, where they used it as an amulet to protect against evil spirits, and that was later incorporated into churches. And it was considered to be a very sacred herb or sacred plant that was sometimes brought into churches, which is kind of interesting, and even burned. Not as, obviously as regularly as frankincense and myrrh, but it was considered to be a very sacred herb that could be used in ritual and clearing spaces and burning it as such. The other place where we see yarrow show up is in China, where we see it being used to make yarrow sticks. And this is actually a set of yarrow sticks that I made when I was in herb school many moons ago. We went to the United Plant Savers Sanctuary out in Ohio, and there was a whole hillside of yarrow. And I asked Paul, who was the steward of the land, can I pick yarrow? And I was like, I'm going to need a lot. I'm going to need 52 sticks. think that's how many there are, to make my yarrow, to make an I Ching, because I'd been doing I Ching for years, and I had used the Yarrow method, but I also had used the coins. So he gave me the okay. So I went and I collected all of my Yarrow sticks. I stripped them off because they look like this, right? And so what I did is I just stripped off all the leaves and I laid them to dry. And then once they dried, actually, I think I hung them to dry so they dried straight. This one I just had laid down. So I hung it to dry so they were nice and straight. And then I took beeswax and I polished them. Actually, no. I sanded them down with sandpaper. So I stripped off some of the green outer bark and then I polished them with beeswax. And, there's nothing, to me, there's nothing more special than having things that you made. There's something really powerful about that. So whenever I use these yarrow sticks, I always think about my time out in Ohio with the plants, with Seven Song and James Snow and Takumbo Obasi, or Ola Takumbo Obasi, and some of my other classmates from that period. Holly Ritchie, so many great memories. But one of the reasons why Yarrow was so revered was because it was considered to be a tool that Yarrow actually, as a plant medicine, helped open the diviner's mind to a state of super consciousness. I think that's pretty darn cool. So, this idea of opening your mind to super consciousness while you're trying to, again, channel the energy of the I Ching, which is very mystical and very spiritual, to ask a question and to try to get a response from this great spirit, or from this sort of great energy. So, if you haven't heard of I Ching, I would recommend checking it out. And if you have an abundance of yarrow, then you may be able to make your own yarrow sticks, I Ching sticks. So let's talk now. Oh, actually, one more thing I wanted to mention about the kind of more esoteric uses is that it was also used as an amulet for protection. And so the leaves were used to put into necklaces or woven into the hair, also made into wreaths, which you can imagine would actually be very pretty. And they were worn to protect against the influence of negative energies. And so, again, very, very long history of use for that reason. And now, I don't know who came up with this, but I've seen it in Matthew Wood's books and in other books, but it being used for the wounded healer, that it's a medicine that's commonly given to healers or people that are in the field of medicine, who they themselves are also healing from wounds. I think that might come from the story of Chiron, and who was a wounded. Chiron gave Yarrow to, who did Chiron give Yarrow to? Achilles, of course, yeah. So he gave it to Achilles, who was a hero, and Achilles, we know, had that wound, that place of vulnerability on the back of his ankle, right, where his mother held him as she dipped him into the waters of immortality. But he had one place that was open, so that was his Achilles heel, right? But it was considered to be a plant that, that was for, I think with Chiron, he, if I remember correctly, he was like lived for, he was basically cursed to live forever with these terrible, with terrible pain. But he was also, an incredible healer. So so we have that story, and we know, we see in a lot of herb books these days that it's used for people who are doing the work of healing, but are also healing their own wounds. And so I think that's a pretty neat parallel to see. Now, in terms of its medicinal values, there's a ton of them. This plant is really, really high in volatile oils, and that gives it the scent that we know and love. And the volatile oils are in the flowers, but really mostly in the leaves. All parts of the plant are medicinal. Actually, well, I should say all the aerial parts. So we don't really use the root medicinally. It's really all of the above ground parts. And so the volatile oils are antibacterial, antiseptic, and also anti-inflammatory. So that can be really good for wounds or any sort of trauma. Also, it can be really good, for any sort of infection. And then it also contains tannins, and tannins are very astringent and drying. And that helps it to be a really good wound healer because it's a styptic, so it stops bleeding. And my favorite way to use it as a styptic is as a spit poultice. So what you can do, I'll just take one of these leaves. Ideally, you do this when it's fresh, but you just chew it up. So I'm chewing on a leaf. I'm trying to mash it into like a little ball like this. And then you would just stick that right on top of the wound. And amazingly, it will stop bleeding and it'll start the healing process right away. My daughter recently got a cut on her cheek. She was playing with a box and she leaned in and the box cut her cheek. And she had just picked some yarrow that day. So I was like, oh, good, let's grab some yarrow from the pantry. And I chewed it up and I stuck it and I put a Band-Aid over. And I just had her wear it during story time and prayer time. And then afterward, I took it off and it was already like it was like all red and puffy. And I was like, that's not good because that can mean infection. And there's definitely a lot of inflammation. And after the yarrow was on there just for like 15 minutes, it was all the redness around the cut was gone and it was starting to heal up. And at that point, I just opened it up and I just let it breathe. By the morning, it had a nice scab on it, so it was fine. So you can do that for really any sort of cut or scrape, or even a deep wound. Matthew Wood tells a story about a man who was chopping wood with a chainsaw and accidentally chainsawed his shin and went inside. And his wife was like, "Oh my gosh, like I think we need to go to the hospital." He's like, "No, we can't go to the doctor." They lived like way out in the country, and so she got a bunch of yarrow, and I don't know if she chewed it, but she macerated it and kept packing it into the wound and did that. It stopped the bleeding really quickly. And then over the course of a few days, it just healed up. And by like a week and a half, you couldn't even tell he had chainsawed his leg off almost. So it's pretty amazing. And again, like all the way back to Pliny, Dioscorides, all of these ancient herbalists, you'll find yarrow in all the ancient herbals. There's also a really nice little poem here by Halliwell, and this plant is also often attributed to the planet Venus. And so it says, "Thou pretty herb of Venus tree, thy true name is Yarrow. Now, whom my bosom friend must be, pray tell thou me tomorrow." So, we see Yarrow show up in a lot of different literary works and in a lot of poems just because of its sacredness. And it has so many affiliations with different stories and different myths. So I think that's pretty wonderful when we have a plant where we can just search back and find so much more that we can learn about it. Let's talk about a few other medicinal values and then other ways to use the plant. So a few other key attributes of this plant is that it has an incredible ability to regulate blood flow. So it's one of my favorite herbs when there's venous stagnation or poor circulation in the body. Matthew Wood talks about how it sort of opens the gates of the heart. So it allows it allows more blood flow back to the heart to become oxygenated. And then it allows for greater strength and blood flow from the heart back through the arteries into the rest of the body, and then from the veins back into the heart. So it creates this really nice rhythm of blood movement through the body. It's also been said to help aerate the blood, which is really helping circulation more or less. We also know that it is really good for stagnation overall and blood stagnation. So if someone has, really cold hands and cold feet, they have poor circulatory blood flow, that can be good. Varicose veins or venous pooling, you can look at the bottom of your tongue like this. If you lift up your tongue and then look underneath, And you should have a little bit of purple tint, but if it's like really bulging, if those two veins on the bottom of your tongue are really bulging and very purple or bluish, then it might mean you have venous stagnation, in which case then something like Yarrow would be really nice. Now, how do we use it? Yarrow works really well as both a tea and as a tincture. So you can use it either way. As a tea, you can just take some of the dried plant. I like to use flowers and leaves together. My favorite source for Yarrow is what is it called? Green Comfort Herb Farm in North Carolina. They have the most amazing yarrow. I'm sure they're probably harvesting about now. So you can check them out. And yeah, so if you can buy it with the flower and the leaves together, that's kind of ideal. And what I do is I just sort of grind it up a little bit, and I'll use about 2 teaspoons in a cup of water and do that 2 to 3 times a day to help promote circulation. Now you can also use it to promote sweating. And so if someone either doesn't sweat, which means that there's an issue with, closed pores, or if they have a fever and you're trying to help them expel and move the fever out, then what you can do is brew a stronger tea. So you might want to take like 2 tablespoons, brew it, let it steep for 15 minutes or so, and then have them drink that throughout the day. So making a strong infusion will really help a person sweat out toxins and sweat out a fever, sweat out a virus, anything that they have. And then as a tincture, it's pretty standard. I prefer fresh plant tincture if you can find it, but dried works as well. And the standard dose is about 5 milliliters, about 2 to 3 times a day. So that's about 3 droppers full twice a day or 3 times a day. And you can calculate, think about your body weight and how sensitive you are to herbs, and that will help you kind of adjust what you might need. So you might, if you're pretty sensitive and pretty small framed like me, I wouldn't take a teaspoon twice a day. I might take half a teaspoon twice a day, something like that, like 3 milliliters, right? 2 to 3 milliliters twice a day. So that's the way that I often think about it. Is the dosage kind of depends on the person's body mass and their sensitivity to outside influences. And that includes herbs, medications, other people, right? Usually the more sensitive the person, the lower dose you need. And that's good for the plants because they don't want to be used up. They're happy to help. But I think when we can just really get a good dosage and make it effective, I think the plants appreciate that. Is there anything else I wanted to say? I think that might be it for Yarrow. Again, I think it's a nice one to carry as a talisman. So if you're traveling, if you're going to a big conference, if you're going somewhere and you just feel like, I want a little bit of a shield for myself, just if you can find a little Yarrow, just stick a few little leaves or a little flower bunch in your pocket. I have a little amulet that I wear where I can put flowers and different things in it. So sometimes when I travel, I'll put some Yarrow in there for protection. So there's a lot of different ways, and even just having it nearby, like my daughter picked this and now it's just sitting on my desk. And I love that. I love just seeing it there and knowing that it's right here with me. And that's good medicine too. One more thing before we close, I wanted to mention that we have our upcoming Summer Herbal Speaker Series that starts on July 24th. I hope you guys can join. It's free to the public. We do pay our teachers, but we fundraise at the end of each year so that we can pay our teachers for the following year. So you can come sign up. You can sign up on the website, skyhouseherbs.com, go to the events page, and then there's 4 different talks that we're doing. One on astrology with Matthew Wood, a talk on root medicine with Ola Takumbo Obasi. Karen Culpepper's doing a talk on creating your herbal practice and visioning. It's really about visioning your next steps as an herbalist. And then Richard Mandelbaum is talking about zoopharmacognosy, which is how animals use plants as medicine. So it's going to be a lot of fun. I hope you guys can join. Thank you for watching. Let me know how you use Yarrow and if you have any other things to share. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a good